So hi, good afternoon. This is Catherine Dunn with the Southern Education Foundation, and this is the webinar on North Carolina voters and the value of public education, featuring Leslie Winner, the Executive Director of the Z. Smith Reynolds Foundation. We'll give folks another couple of minutes to join, but I'll go ahead and introduce the webinar as folks are still signing in. So SES works to advance equity and excellence in education for all students in the South, particularly low-income students and students of color. We use advocacy, research, and collaboration with partner organizations across the region in our work. We're excited to bring today's webinar to you on North Carolina voters and the value of public education to provide our partners across the region and nationally a chance to learn about some important and informative polling data conducted by the Z. Smith Reynolds Foundation in North Carolina. While the poll was conducted in North Carolina, we think that the results are relevant and useful both in and outside of the state, especially for those of us working in neighboring states with similar demographics and politics. In fact, if you're joining us from a neighboring southern state, and even if you're not, what's happened in North Carolina over the past several years will probably sound very familiar to you. North Carolina has a history of supporting and investing in public education across the pipeline, from early education through higher education, and has seen academic outcomes that reflected that investment. But since 2010, there's been a movement to disinvest in and even dismantle public education in the state. In 2014, the legislature provided about $500 million less than what was needed for public education, falling below even some of its southern neighbors, all of whom ranked below national averages. The legislature lifted the charter school cap and allowed for for-profit charters and enacted a voucher law, while states across the nation, particularly in the South, were doing the same. They welcomed for-profit virtual schools and fell to number 47th in teacher pay in the nation, also cutting teacher assistant positions and shutting down a 5-year career teacher prep program at the University of North Carolina called the North Carolina Teaching Fellows. They also cut more for the state's pre-kindergarten program, limiting access for low-income families, while low-income students have become a majority of students in the state's public schools and across the country. So how do these changes reflect how the state's voters value public education? The Z. Smith Reynolds Foundation conducted comprehensive polling of voters in the state and found a disconnect between how the public values public education and current state policies. The challenge for us as advocates and supporters of public education joining this webinar is to learn from these findings and engage the public to build and strengthen support for investment and community-driven reforms and evidence-based policies that work for all kids. A couple of housekeeping items before I turn to Leslie Winner. Everyone is on mute throughout, all of our guests are on mute throughout this webinar, and we'll hold questions till the end of Leslie's presentation, which will be about 30 minutes. So questions pop up to you along the way as Leslie's speaking. Type your answer in the question and answer box in the right-hand corner, and we'll hold it till the end. When she wraps up, we'll offer the opportunity to ask questions in our chat box, as well as to raise your hand with the hand logo above the chat function so that we can unmute you and allow you to verbally ask your question. With that, I'll introduce Leslie, who's the Executive Director of the Z. Smith Reynolds Foundation and has spent much of her career as a public servant and public interest lawyer working on issues like civil rights, gender equity, affordable housing, public education, and higher education. In 2008, she joined the Z. Smith Reynolds Foundation as Executive Director, where she spearheads their grant-making efforts and works with leaders in the private and public sectors to develop best practices, respond to challenges and opportunities, and generate strategies that will advance the future of North Carolina. Prior to this role, Leslie worked as General Counsel to the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Board of Education and as Vice President and General Counsel to the University of North Carolina. She was also elected to 3 terms with the North Carolina State Senate, serving among other positions as Senate Majority Whip and as co-chair of the Education and Higher Education Committee and Appropriations Committee. She is a native of North Carolina. Leslie will now turn to you. Thanks.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. I am Leslie Winter, and the Z. Smith Reynolds Foundation, for those of you who don't know, is an 80-year-old North Carolina foundation that serves just North Carolina. We work to build a state and communities that are more equitable, just, sustainable, and vital. And public education is one of the 5 focus areas that we concentrate our funding and our programmatic work on. So if you want to know more about the Z. Smith Reynolds Foundation, you're welcome to look at our website, and I hope you'll find plenty of information about us on that. I'm going to now focus on this poll and why we did it, and move right into a presentation that has really 2 parts. The first part of it will focus on really voter attitudes about public education currently in North Carolina. The second part of it will focus on what we have learned from this polling and some also focus group work we did about how to communicate about public education in a way that builds public support. So just to go back a little bit, as Catherine said, in 2010 or in 2011, the legislature of North Carolina cut $1 billion out of public education from early childhood up through the university system at a time that they let a 1-cent sales tax expire that would have raised $800 million, thus covering most of the billion that they cut. And as alarming as this action was to me and people at the foundation and other people who cared about public education, it was equally alarming to us how few people were shouting about it. You just didn't hear kind of orchestrated or even unorchestrated public outrage from anybody other than what I think of as the education insiders. So for a state that has a long history of really valuing public education, passing public education bonds and higher education bonds in every county, and really lots of evidence of support for public education, I started wondering what was going on that the legislature could take this dramatic action that it didn't have to take, and there was no real public outcry. And I also, as I thought about that, I also thought that even if there were a lot of voices out there, I wasn't sure that we understood how to talk about public education in a way that would be persuasive to the general public and build broad-based support for adequate funding and support for public education. So we embarked on this work early in 2012. We hired the Neiman Collaborative, a communications firm in DC. They've been really terrific. And we did focus groups and some other work in 2012, and then launched a poll in 2013. And this year, enough had happened since 2013 that we thought we ought to update the poll and see where we were now. So I am, if I can, going to move these slides forward. Does that work? Okay. So I've said why we did this poll, and I'm going to just move right along to the next slide, if I can. So just as a little background on the poll, in 2013 we surveyed 1,500 voters approximately, and in 2015 about 1,235 voters. I will just say that I'm not an expert at this, but I am assured that that is enough, that it's really more than you need in a state like North Carolina to get to have confidence in the results of it. We were really interested in voters, not the general public, and so all of the people that we polled voted in the 2012 elections, and in the 2015 poll, 85% of them had voted in the 2014 elections. In the 2013 poll, about 85% of them had voted in the 2010 elections. So these are good, engaged voters who vote regularly. The poll results, however, were balanced in a way that makes them representative of the demography of the state in terms of race and urban, rural, and the presence of school-age children. So just a little bit about the people that we polled. For the people that have children under 19, 69% of them have their children in public schools. Of course, that also includes people that have children that are pre-public school age, so that's a pretty good percentage of people that have children in public schools. For people who all of their children were over 18, 96% of them had children that ever attended public school. 30% of them had children that ever attended private school. 7% had children that had ever attended charter school, and 9% had children that had ever been homeschooled. And of course, many of these kids had experienced more than one of those options during their educational pathway. So here are the what I think of as the teasers, the kind of main takeaways, and then we'll get into the numbers. So the least surprising thing, if you come from North Carolina, is that voters highly value public education. But more surprising is that they are extremely concerned that it is on the wrong track. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in a couple of minutes. The wrong track has less to do with school performance, so and not with like underperforming teachers, and more to do with the lack of state support for local public schools. And the other kind of main takeaway is that there's less anger about poor performing schools and teachers, so you didn't hear much of it's too hard to fire bad teachers, and more anger about a lack of support for teachers and a lack of support for local schools. So those are the high-level takeaways from all this, from the voter attitude part of this. As you can see, there's been a slight drop since 2013 of the people that think that public education is either very or extremely important. So they ranked at 6 or 7 on a 1 to 7 scale. But even at 85%, that is a really high number. You don't get 85% on polls about anything. And it's interesting that the drop came mostly from the people who rated it as a 7, about the same number of people rated it as a 6, and it came in large part from liberals and moderates. So in the poll, we asked everybody to self-identify as a liberal, a moderate, or a conservative, socially and fiscally, and we actually have used their self-identification on the social end of that. So 86% of the social liberals said that education was extremely important, public education was extremely important in 2013, and now 75% in 2015. The moderates also dropped about 9 percentage points. The conservatives stayed about the same. But even among conservatives, over 70% think that public education is extremely important. So over 70% of people who self-identify as conservatives think that public education is extremely important, 7 out of 7 on a 7 scale. We also asked them whether they thought public education was going in the right direction or in the wrong direction, and you'll see that a substantial increase in the percentage of people who think that education is going in the wrong direction compared in 2015 compared to 2013. So liberals are actually driving this shift between right track and wrong track. 70% of liberals said that education is going in the wrong direction in 2015 versus 44% in 2013. But moderates have also made a significant negative shift, with 54% thinking that education is on the wrong track in 2015 compared to 44% in 2014, and conservatives have remained very constant at about 55% thinking it's on the wrong track. So you can imagine that the reasons the conservatives think it's on the wrong track might be different than why the moderates do and why the liberals do. In 2013, we didn't ask why, but in 2015, we asked them why for the ones who said it was on the wrong track or said it was on the right track, we asked them why. And this is what we got. The top 3 concerns for why education is on the wrong track concern adequacy of funding, things about curriculum and testing, and teachers, both teacher pay and support of teachers, and whether or not we have enough teachers, all things teacher. So those things, curriculum and testing and funding and teacher pay and teachers, teacher turnover, not enough teachers, all of those things, all of those top 5 things are really largely in the control of the state. They're very difficult for local school systems to address. On the other side, for people who said that things were going in the right direction, they tended to be very local, that their local school was doing better, their kid had a good teacher this year, or some about curriculum as well. They tended to be kind of local improvements in curriculum. So the right direction answer tended to be very kind of local school system focused. So in addition to asking how important public education was, which you remember 85% said it was a 6 or a 7 on a 7 scale, we also asked if they thought it was beneficial. And 80% said it was either very or extremely beneficial. So, but if you look at just the 7s, the people who said it was extremely important, 73% of the people said it was extremely important, 7 on a 7 scale, versus 49% who said it was extremely beneficial. So I think this difference between the percentage of people who think it is extremely important versus the people who think it is extremely beneficial is significant, and it, I think, is another sign of concern that while people think it is important, they are not confident that it is delivering. Nonetheless, 80% gave it a 6 or a 7 on a 7 scale as either very or extremely beneficial, and 80% on a poll is a very huge number. So we also asked them if they could to grade the schools, their local schools and their school system schools and the state of North Carolina as a whole. And just as you would expect, the further away from the child, the worse the grades are. So we love our mail carrier, but we don't like the U.S. postal system so much. In this case, the grades have dropped a bit since 2013, and it is still consistently true that the highest grades go to teachers. People like their teachers more than they like their schools, and way more than they like their public school leaders and administrators. And when you get to the state as a whole, they really don't particularly like the leaders and administrators, and that grade has dropped as well. So everything on the whole chart dropped about, most things on the chart dropped about not a letter grade, but a letter sign. So as we dug more into why people were worried about their local schools, 80% of the voters agreed with this statement. State policy and funding decisions are putting greater burdens on our local schools and giving them fewer resources to educate our students. So it's very clear that people are very concerned about the decreasing level of funding and the decreasing level of per pupil funding and the decreasing competitiveness of teacher pay and all of those policy decisions that have been made. We also did a little bit of polling in 2013 about vouchers and some in 2015 about charter schools. And one thing to note on this charter school slide is that only about half of the voters said that they were somewhat or extremely familiar with charter schools, and about over 40% of the people that we polled did not know enough about them to be willing to grade them. But for the 60-ish% that were willing to grade them, they were roughly equivalent to the traditional public schools in the grading. Hang on a second. The voters think that having a charter school education system is, way fewer of them think that it is important. So you have only 45% rating them a 6 or 7 compared to 85% for the public school traditional public school system, and only 60% think that they are beneficial compared to 80% who think that regular public schools are beneficial. They do, however, think that charter schools, and actually in 2013 it was about the same thing for vouchers, should be accountable. So they very much think that any school that is getting taxpayer money should be accountable for the performance of their children. They should be accountable for curriculum and teacher quality, and specifically for voucher schools, private schools that are getting public funds, they think they should be non-discriminatory. So this particular question asked whether they should be allowed to deny a student enrollment based on religious affiliation, and 67% said no. While we know that a large number of the voucher schools in North Carolina do have some kind of religious litmus test for enrolling. I think this is one of the more interesting questions that we asked. We asked, and I think you all can read it, basically Smith versus Jones, and we alternated which one was the woman and which one went first. But one of them said, that they were confident that K12 public education and public schools provide the best option to prepare our children for success in life. This is the best place for all of us to focus our energy and attention. Joan said, I lack confidence that K12 public schools are the best option. I believe that we did charter in 2015 and private in 2013. Are a much more effective approach to education. And I think the interesting thing about this slide, it didn't change much between 2013 and 2015, is that the vast majority of the people, currently 66%, so 2/3 of the people are in the middle. That is, they're not willing to say that they think that charters or vouchers are a better alternative. Actually, only 14% think that in 2015. But they just aren't confident. And I think this 66% of people who are in the middle of this are where we as advocates need to focus our energy. That is, in building their confidence that K12 public education provide the best option to prepare children for success in life. So we also asked what the critical areas for improvement in the K12 public education system are, and you'll see that the top two things even among conservatives, is underpaid teachers, and the top two things overall are underpaid teachers and inadequate funding. And as you look down this list, I think it's interesting some of the things that dropped from 2013, like student discipline, dropped 11% of people who said that that was a top thing. It is definitely a swing towards underpaid teachers, inadequate funding, class size, and some consistent concern about curriculum. Here's just another way of setting that out that's a little bit clearer. Here are the top answers. I'll just let you glance down that. In the interest of time, I'm not going to read all these. And then we asked who they think is that they clearly don't know what the role of the State Board of Education is. But in spite of that, you can tell that most of this responsibility is being pinned on things at the state level, the State Board of Education, the governor, the legislature, and much less of it is being attributed to the local level, the local school board, principals, teachers, a little bit on parents. Basically, they only think superintendents are responsible for safety. So, and even that they think is secondary to the State Board of Education. So a definite sense that the people responsible for the problems in public education are at the state level, not at the local level. And then we asked on this 1 to 7 scale how important the following are, and the percentages on this are the people who rated them as a 6 or 7 on this 1 to 7 scale. And you'll see again that the top 3 are about funding and teachers. So the top most important thing was making sure the school district is adequately funded. Second thing is providing capacity of teachers to be the best they can be. Making sure teachers have opportunities to improve their teaching techniques. So those are the top, and then the next one is providing equal opportunities for all students. So a little bit of analysis of this, although I think I've pretty much given the analysis as we went along. There's less anger about poor performing schools and teachers and more anger about a lack of support for teachers in schools. The top 4 problems are largely out of control of the local schools: underpaid teachers, inadequate funding, large class sizes, and curriculum quality and over-testing. Lack of funding is a top concern across groups. I showed you this before, but here's a breakdown. 74% of conservatives think this, as well as 80% of moderates and 87% of liberals. Now I'm going to switch, and I'm a little short on time here. I'm also having trouble switching it. I'm going to switch to what we've learned about building support for public education. I'm going to go through this theory of this pretty fast. If somebody wants to learn more about this, I'd be happy to do that some other way. But generally, when these people who are advising us about communications think about talking about public school or talking about anything, they go on a gradation of talking about attributes that produce benefits, that create emotions, that feed into personal values. And all too often, us public school advocates talk about attributes and benefits. We rarely talk about emotions or values. So this analysis will talk about how to tie the attributes and benefits to the emotions and values. So this is all of the things that out of the focus groups people said were important to them about public education. Attributes, benefits, attributes like education quality, diversity, curriculum. Benefits involve parents, opportunities to excel, being prepared for a productive life. Emotions, confident, hopeful, responsible. And values, accomplished parents, better society, successful individuals, and fair and equal schools. So then, Cyrus, Catherine, I don't know if you're listening, or Micah, but I have lost my arrows for being able to move these slides forward. There, they came back. Thank you. No, they went away again.
Leslie, Micah's going to try to manually move to the next slide for you.
That'd be great. Maybe he should just do that, and I'll just say next. That's not optimal, but I think it might be more efficient.
Okay, that sounds great. Sorry about that.
Okay, so there are these four decision pathways. One that leads to accomplished parents. So you have educational quality, excellence, involved parents, makes them feel excited, empowered, confident, hopeful, and optimistic. The next one is on the next slide, is better society, which is what we frequently talk about, which is interesting support programs, future opportunities, makes people feel responsible, and a better society. Next. The next is successful individuals. Education quality produces students that are prepared for a productive life, makes people feel hopeful and optimistic, and that there will be successful individuals. And then the last one is the pathway, standard curriculum, equal education, fair and equal schools. So what I want to say about these is all four of these attributes were considered important by people, but the attributes that are the most important are the accomplished parents and the successful individuals. That is that people, the voters, generally want all four of these things, but they have to have the accomplished parents and the successful individuals. And the better society and the fair and equal schools play a secondary role. So that if they can have all of them, all the better, but if they can only have two of them, what they need is confidence that they are doing their role as parents well, and confidence that their kids are going to grow up to be successful individuals. So that presents some problem for us who think that equal and fair schools and better society are what we're after. And I am convinced that you just can't get there in terms of persuasion unless you can figure out how to do all four at the same time. So in that vein, you get to say, and so if we're really successful in preparing each and every child to be successful in life, then we also will have accomplished having a better society and fair and equal schools. It turns out that the emotion that is the most important is confidence. Parents are just really insecure, so especially parents need to feel confident that these decisions that they're making for their children are the right decision. So you can go to the next slide. So in preparing this messaging framework, we did a kind of hybrid model of the accomplished parents, better society, and successful individuals. And it turns out that the education quality, excellence, and interaction that leads to involved parents and each child prepared for a productive life, which lets people feel confident, hopeful, and optimistic that they will be doing their role well as parents, that each child will be able to be a successful individual, and that we will end up with a better society, is the strongest merger of the information that we gleaned from the focus groups and these polls. So next slide. And this is just a little bit about what's inside these boxes. I'm going to skip that and go to the next slide. So what does this all teach us about how to talk about public education? One is that we must connect to aspirations. That is, that we have to talk about public education in terms of what people aspire to for themselves, their families, and their children, and not to what these systems, bureaucracies, buildings, and structures need. Next slide. Institutions are not as important as aspirations. So we tend to talk about what schools need to be successful, what our school systems need to be successful, but what we need to be talking about is what our, really each child needs to be successful. And interestingly, when we talk about all children, people seem to think that we're talking about somebody else's children. It really needs to be done in terms of each child or every child. Each is even a little better than every. And also, interestingly, parents of color feel the same about this as white parents in this poll. There was really no racial difference. Next slide. We need to promote public schools by speaking to what parents and voters value. Next. So here are the key parent priorities. We need, what parents prioritize is public schools that give each child the opportunity to learn and progress. They want excellent teachers. They want schools that provide for a complete education. And what that means is they are worried about reading and math and STEM, but they also want kids that grow up that are resilient and prepared to deal with a world that they know will be changing. And the kind of bottom line is they want schools that prepare each child for life, higher education, and work. And it turns out that life, higher education, and work all resonate about to the same degree. Next. So out of this, we have developed a new message framework that actually isn't new, didn't change almost at all from 2013. None of this messaging really changed. So next slide. Just as context, the state, as we've seen before, the state's on the hook for the negative state of public education, but local schools aren't off the hook for delivering education in a way that satisfies parent aspirations and provides the public with value. So really, as a policy matter, we can try to deal with the funding, the curriculum, the teacher pay, et cetera. But on the ground, the best way to build confidence has to do with how teachers and principals and school board members talk to and interact with parents and other members of the public. Next. As a matter of strategy, local schools and their advocates have to continue student and parent-centric messaging while voicing the need for teachers and resources, so with the goal of producing well-rounded, self-sufficient students who are prepared for success in college, career, and life. Next. So, as I said, we have to continue to talk about common goals for each child before talking about the way to achieve them. So when I try to talk about teacher pay, I always start with the goal of public schools is to prepare each child who is there to be successful in life, and we all know that we can't prepare each child to be successful unless each classroom has a good teacher. And we're not going to have a good teacher in every classroom unless we're willing to pay them adequately to support their families and sustain their career as teachers. So you eventually get there, but you link it to the success of each child as the ultimate goal. Next. As I mentioned before, we have to understand that parents are really anxious about their role as parents. Any of you who are parents of 4-year-olds or know parents of 4-year-olds, it's hard to find a more anxious person than the mother of a 4-year-old who is trying to be confident that she is going to have her child in a school that is going to enable her child to be successful. We are in a really anxious time, and giving parents confidence that they are making the good choices for their children is a really important thing. Next. I think I'll skip this. Next. So as I said, we can address institutional needs for supplies, for funding, for teacher pay, whatever it is, but we need to do it in the context of what is needed to move each child ahead. Next. It's interesting that in talking to the focus groups, while they were very focused on teachers, they were also very focused as a key advantage of public schools that they tend to have more variety of support services that actually can meet the needs of each child. And so this thing that says teachers and a supportive school culture really does mean an attitude of support, but also the various kinds of support that public schools tend to provide that frequently other options do not provide. Next. And if you want to know about this survey in great detail, it is all up there on the Reynolds website, and you're welcome to look at it and use it out however you want. It's out there in the public domain. And thank you.
Thank you so much, Leslie. That was incredibly informative. We'd love to open it up for those of you who have questions now. Micah is going to unmute the all attendees so that you can ask your questions, but you can also feel free to type them in the Q&A box to the right. The folks should be unmuted now. You can also use the raise your hand feature above chat to ask your questions. One of the things that I thought was particularly interesting, Leslie, in the poll is the distinction between, or the discrepancy, I guess, between those who find public education important and those that see it as beneficial. That's reflected also in the confidence levels, right? So I think a challenge for all of us is, you know, the areas that are identified by voters as in need of improvement, like student discipline and curriculum quality and things like that, is to articulate strong visions for, you know, how we will address those improvements. It's important that people, you know, appreciate and understand the importance of public education as a system, as an institution, but that, you know, there are improvements that we as advocates who support public education still need to work towards and articulate, you know, strong visions towards. So I think that's an important reminder and finding of the poll. We've got a couple of questions that have come in. So one is, how are you guys at C. Smith Reynolds using this information, and what groups will get this presentation going forward?
So we have given lots of presentations about it in North Carolina to education advocates, to school superintendents. In 2014, we had a group of education advocates that we worked with for a year to use particularly the messaging information in their own context, some local education foundations, a variety of people. And then in 2015, we made an offer to the 10 largest school systems in North Carolina, which actually educate about almost half the kids, to kind of do a peer working group with the chief information officer and somebody high in academic affairs to learn how to use this information for the benefit of their own school system. So we've been working with this team of 10 school systems, 2 people from each school system, to help them incorporate this information into how their school systems communicate, and also how they interact with parents. We've also provided it in lots of principal training seminars. We'll basically try to get it out. You know, we're kind of limited within North Carolina to do. If we're paying for it, it has to be in North Carolina. But we've tried to get it out in North Carolina to everybody who's asked us for it.
The other, another answer to that question is that, you know, this webinar and this recording today will be made available to folks who couldn't join today, but were interested in getting the presentation. So we'll make sure you guys all get that link. Another question is, how do you see this information moving actual voter choices? So
because we're a 501c3 private foundation, we don't engage in anything that has to do with elections or voting. So that is not our goal in doing this project.
So we've got an audio question from an attendee, Micah, Evan Walker. Evan, you should be able to ask your question now.
Great. Hi. Thank you so much for the presentation. My name is Evan Walker-Wells. I'm here with Jesse Williams at Scalawag, and we're a magazine and nonprofit covering and website covering Southern politics and culture based in Durham, covering, you know, really with focus on North Carolina. One thing I'm kind of curious about in this presentation is something that, is really exciting to see entering public discussion a little bit more, which is the question of dealing with resegregation of public schools in North Carolina and obviously around the country as well. And I'm a little curious, Leslie, how you would suggest kind of building messaging around resegregation and the importance of desegregating public schools based off of this kind of research.
So I will say that the Reynolds Foundation also thinks that resegregation is a huge problem in North Carolina, and that promoting integration and desegregation is a real goal of ours. I think this data presents a big challenge for us, and I have had some conversations with sort of high-level thinkers in the racial equity and integration communications, good thinkers, and had them talk with the Neiman folks to try to reconcile how to honor this need for parents to believe that each child is going to be benefited, and also honor the need to acknowledge the racial disparities and racial segregation in the state. So I think that this is an ongoing challenge. I think it is really important because I think it's important for us to move forward with racial equity concerns and integration concerns, and to be careful that we're doing it in a way that is likely to be constructive and is not likely to be counterproductive. And I have an ongoing commitment to trying to sort that out. I don't think it's an easy question.
Thanks for the question and for the answer, Leslie. The next question is, you mentioned that most voters thought the problems with education were at the state level. Were there any drill downs as to why voters made that connection? And I actually had a related question about the change between 2013 and 2015 with folks seeing the underfunding of teachers' salaries in particular as an area of great concern. You know, if you identified things over that period that helped voters make the connection between decisions at the state level and underfunding of teacher salaries. But the question from the attendee is, you know, was there any drill down as to why voters made that connection?
So there wasn't in the survey a drill down about why they made that connection, but we were more interested just in the fact that they did make the connection. I do think that just being an observer of what's happened in the state, that between 2013 and 2015, there was a lot more conversation about public education and about teachers. I think some of that conversation and communication and social media, et cetera, came from efforts that the foundation took to make that happen, and a lot of it happened in other ways. But the level of discourse about public education in North Carolina between 2012 and 2014 increased dramatically.
Oh, thanks, Leslie. Have you had any response? Another question is whether there's been any response from state powers to seeing this poll, or any indication that I guess they're getting the message, which is not, I know, the work of D. Smith Reynolds, but any indication maybe from your partner?
I don't think I know the answer to that. And, you know, the poll is out there publicly, and we don't really have any way of knowing who has looked at it, used it, forwarded it to somebody else. So I don't know whether any of our current state elected officials are aware of it or not.
Thanks. We've got one last question which we'll take. So Allison asks, are you familiar with the Righteous Mind framework for moral foundations? If so, how can we focus on loyalty, authority, and sanctity of public schools rather than care, liberty, and fairness?
So I'm not sure that I am familiar with that framework. I will say that, and one of the aha moments for me was I had gone into this communication thinking that the goal was to persuade the public of the public benefit of public education. And it turns out that the public already understands the public benefit of public education. They don't have confidence that it is providing actual individual children with what they need, and that we don't have to let go of our higher aspirations to public benefits and fair and equal schools, but we have to recognize that we can't get there as long as people believe that when you talk about those things, you're talking about somebody else's kids and that their kids are not going to get what they need. And that is just a really important and hard thing for us to grapple with and to think of as strategies that don't take the place of our values, but that have to be consistent with our values and have to be strategic. So our communications have to stay consistent with our values, and they have to be strategic if we're going to be successful.
Thanks,
I don't think I answered
Leslie,
the question.
Well, that's incredibly insightful, and thanks so much for doing the poll and for being willing to share the findings with all of us. So, like I mentioned, this poll and webinar will be available on SES website, southern-education.org, under our Resource Center, and then under videos. You'll also find some past webinars that we've done for the region. Our last one last week was on the Kentucky model of community schools, which aims at removing non-academic barriers to success in schools across Kentucky. This webinar will be up in the next week, and everyone registered will receive a link to it. And then, as Leslie mentioned, the full detailed results of the poll are on the Z. Smith Reynolds website, zsr.org. The full link is up on your screen. But thanks so much, Leslie, for taking the time to share it with us today, and for all of you for joining it and being interested in this and for being advocates for public education in the South and across the country. We look forward to continuing to work with you. Thanks.
Thank you.